Are you overpaying for new construction in Dallas? Well, you probably are at risk for doing just that, and builders know it. At the core of this question, and why this is such a huge issue in Texas, is this fact. Texas is a non-disclosure state. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, writer Seth Williams with RE Tipster explains some of the most important data we need are the comparable sale prices for the properties we're evaluating. And he continues, but there's a problem. This sold price data is not available to the general public in some states. Now, Seth's article focuses on investors buying homes to sell or rent, but you as a home buyer need to have the perspective that your home is an investment. I mean, true, you're not buying to rent it out, right? You're gonna live there, but you have to look at it as a way to build future wealth, which brings us back to our original question, right? How can you know if you're overpaying? Well, let's talk about comparable sales. RE Tipster helps us out again when it explains comparable sales are used as measuring tools to help to determine the fair market value of a property. And that's what we're after, right? Like, we want to know the fair market value so you don't overpay. Now, individual sellers and realtors, they use sold homes to figure out a fair asking price, like what a home should be listed for, right? But here's the thing. Builders don't follow those rules. Builders wildly move their sales data by raising the prices, slashing the prices, and sometimes confusing things even further with complicated incentives. Now, you have plenty of states where that just isn't gonna fly, but in Texas, it does. Williams gives us some good insight into why that is. He explains how levels of disclosure fall into 3 camps in the U.S. Green represents full disclosure states where the sales prices of properties are openly reported and accessible to everyone. He continues, red denotes non-disclosure states where no reliable public sources are available to obtain sales prices for all properties. Orange indicates states that fall in between, with limited disclosure. In these states, making an educated guess about property values is possible based on the partial information disclosed to the public. There aren't that many non-disclosure states. I mean, they are definitely in the minority, but wouldn't you know, Texas is one of them. Now, if you're relocating to Dallas from states like, California, Washington, or New York, this may be completely foreign to you. Like, you're used to being able to look up the public records and see exactly what homes have sold for. Well, that's not the case in Texas. You are not going to be able to do that. Homelight explains if you live in a non-disclosure state, it means that sales prices in a real estate transaction are not disclosed or recorded as public record. It continues, if you want to know the sales price of a home, you'd have to ask the seller directly or work with a real estate professional who has access to the multiple listing service, MLS. Otherwise, you're in the dark. Now, individual home sellers don't tend to think about capitalizing on this. And they also don't have the ability to influence an entire neighborhood, okay? They're just one seller. The tendency is they're gonna look to a realtor for a suggested list price and then list their home accordingly. New construction communities aren't like that. The builders have entire communities of like 20, 30, even 40 inventory homes where they can move prices around to confuse you as to what fair market value really is. As a result, new construction pricing has a lot of movement. They raise and lower prices every few days. Now, if you speak with a sales consultant, you're likely going to be told they're having a huge sale and they've just slashed their prices. But then on the flip side, all right, you might hear, my manager just told me we're raising prices on Monday. And maybe they are, all right? The thing you have to remember is neither of those events actually tells you what the home should be listed for in the first place. If they tell you they've just slashed prices, your natural assumption will be that the home was priced fairly to begin with and is now being sold at a discount. If you hear prices are going up next week, your tendency is to think that the home is priced correctly now and it's about to become more expensive. Well, please hear me when I say neither of these things actually tell you what a suggested list price should be. You are truly in the dark on this. So price reductions and price hikes will get you caught overpaying. If you're not careful, rate incentives can get you caught overpaying too. All right, what so often happens here is the buyer gets focused too heavily on their monthly payment, not the price of the home. Interest rates are extremely powerful when it comes to your monthly payment, and many builders will pay to have that interest rate reduced. And this isn't cheap either. John Burns, a real estate research and consulting firm, estimates that permanently reducing a buyer's rate by 1.5% on an FHA loan would cost between $19,700 and $34,200 for an entry-level home, depending on the home price. Now, I am a huge fan of builders paying down your interest rate, but your risk here is in overpaying. The builder wants to recover his costs, so he will often ridiculously overprice the home. Now, we had this happen recently with an Ashton Woods home our buyer was considering. I mean, the offer was an amazing 2-1 buy down plus fixed rate forward commitment. The interest rate for the first year was 3%. The second year was 4%, and all remaining years were a fixed rate of 5%. That is a fabulous incentive, all right? But here's the thing. When we did the market analysis, the home was overpriced by $50,000. There wasn't a single sale in the entire community that even remotely supported what they were asking for in that home. So the offer sounds amazing, and it's not that it just sounds amazing, okay? It is amazing. But if you as a buyer are only focused on your monthly payment, you might jump at it if you don't have that market analysis. Now, in this situation, Ashton Woods wasn't doing anything wrong, okay? They're not doing anything wrong here. They can price the home however they want to. They were advertising an unbeatable rate incentive where they would have recovered the entire cost of that buy down and a little left over besides if a buyer focused on the monthly payment only. Now, hopefully I haven't sent you into a nebulous no man's land of feeling, how will I ever know what a home should really be listed for? Because you can know. The data is there. As an unlicensed professional, you just don't have access to it. Because again, Texas. As RE Tipster explains, an appraiser or realtor has to step in with the data and ask, where is the property located? What is the square footage of the building, both finished and unfinished? What is the total acreage of the lot? How many bedrooms and bathrooms are there? What year was the home or structure built? Have there been any recent upgrades or renovations? Are there any special features? This is just the starting point of a market analysis. A solidly prepared analysis can take several hours to prepare, especially when the ideal conditions aren't met. Tipster explains, in a perfect world, a comparable property would be 100% identical to the subject property in every conceivable way. However, in the real world, no two properties are exactly alike due to a number of factors. I want to show you a few examples of what the constant price movement looks like in new construction. When I look on the MLS, I see arrows, lots and lots of arrows. Like take Arbors at Legacy Hills in Salina, for example. 4 have just raised their prices and 3 have just dropped them. Or how about Walden Pond in Forney? You have 9 homes with price reductions and 7 with price increases. So there's that constant price movement. I mean, if the builder was just all about offering a big sale, would he really be raising prices on half his listing? No, it's just more about like constantly changing the prices. Overpaying for a home is a huge problem because let's say you buy a home for $520,000, but the true market value was only $471,000. If you need to sell within the next few years, whether due to a job change, a family situation, or just a shift in priorities, you're going to be in trouble. You will owe a higher amount. And that means you either lose money out of pocket or you're stuck in a house that you're upside down on. It's draining you financially, but you can't sell it. And it doesn't stop there, right? If interest rates drop to like 5% and you want to refinance, you can't because your home doesn't appraise high enough to cover the closing costs. So now you're stuck with a 7% interest rate and you can't refinance, okay? You can't refinance, you can't sell. So suddenly what felt like a dream home, all right, becomes a burden that traps you, okay? And this happens all the time. In fact, let's walk through a real life illustration. In this market snapshot, 3 homes recently closed at around $170 per square foot, clearly lining up market value. But then one buyer came in and paid $186 per square foot, so significantly above the norm. Now focus on homes number 1 and 4, okay? They're identical in floor plan and size. I reviewed the listing photos. They're literally the same house and they closed just 1 week apart. Buyer A paid $323,000. Buyer B for the same home paid $348,150. So that is a $25,150 difference for no difference in value. I mean, buyer A purchased at market price. Buyer B, okay, they're already in the red. Here's another case in Forney. 2 buyers each paid exactly $163 per square foot for homes that were absolutely comparable. Same features, same level of upgrades, all right? So this represents a solid benchmark for what a suggested list price should look like. But then along comes a third buyer who paid $179 per square foot for a very similar home. Now, I reviewed all 3 comparables across the board. Why would this buyer have paid so much more? Well, here's what happened. That home was originally listed at $604,900. After a major price drop, it was reduced to $549,900. And that's when the buyer entered the picture. So with a realtor representing them, the buyer ended up negotiating a final price of $520,000. So sounds like a win, right? So from their perspective, they snagged a home already marked down and then got it reduced even further. The agent may very well have even celebrated the deal as like a big negotiating success. But let's look at the current reality. If that same home were listed today, the recommended price would be around $471,000, which means the buyer overpaid by $48,115. So on paper, the negotiation looked strong. But in the real world, that buyer is now sitting upside down. Now, I do want to point this out. On a market analysis, it is healthy to see a general trending up of values. For example, you might see home sales within a range of $150 to $160 per square foot. Okay, that's perfectly normal. And it's a good thing. Where you know a buyer has been taken, though, is like we saw earlier. You'll see several comparable sales at $163 a square foot, and then one suddenly sold at $179 a square foot. When that happens, the builder has scored a win here, but the home buyer has overpaid and they're not going to be able to sell. Now, I want to give you a buying blueprint on this. When you walk into a model home office and a sales consultant greets you and tells you what their homes are priced for, realize that what they tell you is not an indicator of what the home should actually be listed for. Approach it from a standpoint of, hey, that's helpful information. Thank you for providing it. But constantly be aware that it is the comparable sales, the market analysis, the data that's going to anchor you on what a home should be listed for. And I know this may sound cynical, all right, but having been in this business for almost 2 decades, I can tell you whatever price they quote is probably not going to line up with a market analysis. I always tell my buyers, when you walk into a model home, keep a poker face. If the home is a 10 out of 10, don't say a word about that. All right, decide if you like the home, gather information from the sales consultant, but don't at any time begin negotiating. If there's a home there that would work for you, jot that down. But again, you want to keep things at an arm's length. And the reason is that you don't know what the list price on the home should be because you don't have the data yet. So what's your next step? Getting that data, getting those numbers. And make no mistake, the market analysis does more than tell you what the list price on the home should be. It also tells you a ton about our seller builder. You can know if they've been coming down on price. You can know if they are paying towards the buyer's closing costs and how much on average. You can know how exposed they are in terms of inventory. All right, only after we know all that do we begin engaging with the sales consultant and negotiating. By then, you have a tactical advantage because you know a whole lot more about them than they know about you. You also know what price range the home should be listed for. So market analysis first, then discuss price and negotiations. The sales consultant should not dictate where negotiations start. You, as the empowered buyer, first ascertain what a suggested list price should be and then negotiate from there. Okay, so now let's talk about the gatekeepers, all right? We know that Texas is a non-disclosure state, and you'll need to rely on licensed professionals such as realtors or appraisers to gain comparable sales. In Dallas, you will have realtors who provide zero services whatsoever, but who will rebate part of their commission back to you. Experienced buyers from disclosure states may see this as a great opportunity. They feel like with the data they're used to seeing, they have a firm enough grip on value that they can handle it on their own. But what they don't realize, again, is in Texas, you are blind to closed sales. You are not going to be able to access the data. So you go into the home purchase thinking, how cool is it to get $10,000 back from a no service realtor, but then you overpay for the house. I mean, sometimes by $100,000 or more. A buyer like that can't sell. If rates drop to 5%, they can't refinance. In that situation, you as a buyer have to decide if that temporary rebate is a win for your long-term future. When you come from a full disclosure state, and especially where home prices are much higher, you've got a lot of risk here if you're confident in your ability to determine value on your own. So you have your no service realtor, all right? But then you have realtors who may have the best personalities on YouTube, and they'll provide some services like meeting you at the property, but they don't understand the importance of the market analysis. You also have realtors who just don't know how to do them. What it boils down to is you absolutely must interview a realtor before you decide to hire them. Look for things like experience and how much this person relies on data and reports. I mean, have an extensive conversation about the comparative market analysis. Ask a lot of questions. Now, hopefully it goes without saying, okay, this is exactly what we do. So if we sound like the right fit for the job, the best way to reach us is through our Let's Find Home questionnaire that you can find in the description section. Inventory's up, builders are motivated, and pricing is tricky. Now, we've covered the tricky pricing here, but if you want to know more about inventory and the market, I suggest checking out this video. In the meantime, this is Wendy Pennell, and I will see you in the next video.